I've made a lot of mistakes. I've suffered failures. I've had a few successes. I've learned a lot. And what I have learned through my life, I believe, is a priceless legacy to pass on to younger people. We don't want them to make the same bloody mistakes we made.
Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see such a tremendous turnout here tonight. I'm very pleased to be welcoming all of you to the Bram and Bluma Appel Salon and the annual June Callwood Lecture. Some of you here tonight may have known June Callwood. However, certainly many of you will be aware of her legacy in terms of community activism. Perhaps you applauded her for founding Casey House or for working to end child poverty here in Canada. Wherever there was injustice, June's voice could be heard. Her simple reply when asked why she was involved in so many causes was, "I saw there was a problem." And this comment became the inspiration for the June Callwood Lecture Series here at Toronto Public Library, established in her name. June Callwood believed in the citizen activist, and her purpose for this lecture was to bring important activists and change agents to the stage and give them a platform to inspire us all. In past years, the Callwood Lecture has focused on the power of goodness with Sister Mary Jo Leddy, the justice system with lawyer James Lockyer, morality and courage with writer and activist Sally Armstrong, the challenges of becoming a Canadian with Maitri Foundation head Ratna Avdavar, the urgency of caring for others with street nurse Kathy Crow, the power of advocacy with Stephen Lewis, tolerance and humanitarianism with Olympic gold medalist Mark Tewksbury, and the human right to water with Maud Barlow. Tonight, I'm so very honored to introduce to you Dr. David Suzuki, who I must say hardly needs any introduction. David is an internationally renowned geneticist and environmentalist, and he is beloved as the host of the long-running series, The Nature of Things, on the CBC. He is the author of more than 50 books, including his just-published memoir, Letter to My Children. As you'll hear tonight, early people in Canada and indeed around the world learned through their mistakes that their survival and well-being were utterly dependent on nature. David will speak tonight on Indigenous cultures and why, in our efforts to sustain an ecosystem that will support our children and grandchildren, why we must fight to keep these cultures alive. Following the lecture, there will be a Q&A, and so I encourage all of you to take notes throughout the lecture and give careful consideration to your questions, so that if you do have a question, please approach the microphone, which is in the center of the aisle over here, and be brief and succinct so that Dr. Suzuki can answer as many questions as possible. Following the Q&A, as we've already mentioned, there will be a book signing at the back, and there'll be assistance in terms of lining up and to ensure that it's done as efficiently as possible. I'm thrilled to say that we have over 900 people here in the library tonight for tonight's lecture. Woo! I've already welcomed all of you here in the room tonight, and we have another 300 people seated downstairs in the atrium watching us on a video screen. So afterwards, I invite those of you who are downstairs to come up and have your book signed following the event. I also invite everyone to follow the conversation online with hashtag Appel Salon. And tonight's lecture is being taped and will be posted on our website very soon. The June Callwood Lecture is partially funded by the Toronto Public Library's Foundation's June Callwood Endowment Fund. And so if you're interested in contributing to this fund, your donation will go a long way in helping us sustain this very important annual lecture series. Please approach one of our foundation members following the event and let us know they'll let you know how you can be involved. Then the very last, I'd like to thank Greystone Books and the David Suzuki Foundation for making David's appearance here tonight possible. And now, please help me welcome Dr. David Suzuki.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel I was one of the very fortunate Canadians to have known June Callwood. And of course, I, like millions of Canadians across the country, were grateful to have a person like that, who I thought was the best example of what civil society and leadership is all about, and how we miss her, especially in these trying times with the government that we've got. I don't mean Ontario, I mean the federal government. Looking at or listening to the recitation of the people that have been part of this wonderful lecture series, I feel very honored to be here with you tonight. My grandparents emigrated to Canada from Japan between 1902 and 1906. My parents were born in Vancouver, Dad in 1909 and my mom in 1911. My grandparents never learned to speak English. And my parents said, "You're Canadians," to me, and you're going to learn to speak English well, and if you're going to learn another language, it's got to be French. So I never learned to speak Japanese. And what it meant was that I never had a serious conversation with any of my grandparents. And I never got to ask. When my last grandmother died, I realized that a whole part of who I am was gone. I didn't know why they came to Canada, how difficult it was to make that 4 to 6 week journey across the Pacific, and what did they find when they came to a very hostile country? Were they happy or glad that they came and stayed? And how did they feel about it? I never got to ask these important questions. And now that I'm an elder, I'm in the last part of my life, and I know that I could kick the bucket at any moment. And when I do, I don't want my grandchildren to go, "Oh gosh, I wish I'd asked that about Grandpa," or Bompa, as my grandchildren call me. The book, by the way, is not letters to my children, it's letters to my grandchildren. Yes. This is why I wrote the letter, and the book. It's a conversation with my grandchildren. So, in a conversation, you start along on a certain topic, and you suddenly loop out into something else, and then come back into it. That's how I tried to develop the book. And in the past, when I've had a book tour, I've just used the book as an excuse to give a speech about the environment, and I just give a talk. But this is a very different kind of book, and I wanted to share some of the ideas and messages that I was trying to pass on to my grandchildren. So this is a book written for my grandchildren, but I hope for those of you that may buy it and read it, that as you read it, you'll consider what you want to tell your grandchildren and pass on to them. I meant to put up a diagram of my family. I contributed to the population problem. I have 5 children, 3 from my first marriage, and from them I have 3 grandchildren from 2 of my daughters. The one set are Tomo and Midori, and their father was a Chilean. And Jonathan lives in Toronto with his mom and dad, and he has severe cerebral palsy. So he's got very special needs. My second wife, Tara, and I had 2 daughters, Severn and Sarika, and they've got, Severn is married to a Haida, lives in Haida Gwaii, and they have 2 sons, Guntlans, we call him Gunny, and Tisan. And recently, my youngest daughter just completed her PhD and completed it at the same time she gave birth to my last grandson, Rio. Rio, they chose the word because in Spanish it means river. Chris, the father, is a river guide. And Rio because in Japanese it means dragon. So let me start then on the book. We often speak of Canada as if it is founded on the 2 original countries from France and from England, and that's the basis of what this country is. And I think this really overlooks the fact that there is a much more fundamental difference between the Indigenous people who were here when Europeans first came and then all of the migrants who have come here over the past 500 years. There's a fundamental difference in perspective that really explains a lot of things about why we've been so ecologically destructive, but also why Indigenous people now are really leading the fight about the environment. So let me start with a passage here. My mother and father, like most of the Japanese kids born in Canada at that time, grew up without elders or grandparents because they were all back in Japan. Can you imagine growing up without ever knowing your grandparents? This lack of grandparents and other elders, I believe, was significant for children of immigrants to all new and distant lands, not just Canada, because it meant that they had only the shallowest roots to the old country and no roots at all in the new one. Although there was anti-Asian racism and discrimination, Canada offered opportunities that Japan didn't. When the Japanese arrived in Canada, they did not have the historical or cultural attachment to the land that Indigenous people have. And so what they saw land as was as a commodity, real estate. If there were fish on it, catch them and sell them. If there are trees, cut them down and sell them. If there were minerals, dig them up and sell them. If there was topsoil, grow vegetables and sell them. That's why people sought new lands for resources to exploit for economic return. And that's the way it's been for immigrants ever since that great wave of exploration, conquest, and settlement in North and South America, Africa, Australia, and New Zealand that began 5 centuries ago. As you know, so this is, I'm writing to my grandchildren, Nana, that's my wife Tara, Nana and I have worked a lot with First Nations people in Canada and with other Indigenous communities in other parts of the world. We have learned so much from them about radically different ways of seeing the land. For people who lived in an area for thousands of years, rather than mere decades or even centuries, land is far more than a commodity. It is their home, and it is sacred. And that, I think, is the lesson that we're gaining as more and more Aboriginal people are involved in the environmental battles going on. People often ask me, especially young people, what it was that led me on the career path that ultimately led to environmental activism. And I tell them that one of the major factors that shaped the direction I took as a person was Pearl Harbor. When Japan attacked the United States in 1941, it turned the lives of Japanese Canadians like me and my family upside down. And the consequences of that, the loss of our property, incarceration for 3 years, and then expulsion from BC, the consequences of that led to many of my hang-ups, and I've got lots, and a knee-jerk response to bigots and discrimination. So let me read from the first chapter on racism. My dearest grandchildren, you are growing up in a very different time from when I was a boy. Even though I was a Canadian, born in Canada like my mom and dad, we were suspect because we were of Japanese descent. Equality before the law, freedom of speech and movement, the right to vote are principles of democracy that you all take for granted, but they did not always apply to everyone. Gunny and Tisan, you know your Nanai and Chinai's parents, Nanai and Chinai are grandparents in Haida, couldn't vote because they were Haida, and my parents couldn't vote either because they were Japanese. It's important to remember that and to understand that today you might not feel discriminated against, but that bigots who hate Muslims, Jews, gays, or any other group because of color, religion, ethnic group, sexual orientation, or even poverty could just as easily turn against you because they are ignorant, and in their ignorance are afraid of people who look different or act differently, behave differently. We must always stick up for someone who is being picked on, because one day it could be our turn again. It's funny how when we were kids, we don't see the differences that adults do. We learn what to fear or hate from our parents or others around us. When I was a boy, we were living in a small town in Leamington, Ontario. A friend and I were playing in an empty lot one day when Dad came by coming from work on his bike. I yelled to him and he waved back. And my friend just looked at me with these big wide eyes and he said, "How do you know him?" I laughed and said, "That was my dad, stupid." "But he's a chink," my friend said. And I didn't know whether to laugh or to be angry because he had used a racial slur. But I realized that when we played together, color made no difference. Yet he could see racial differences as he recognized in Dad. And he must have been told something bad about chinks. So I have a chapter called Motivation and Values. My father was my great mentor, my teacher, my hero. And in 1994, he was dying, and I moved in to care for him the last month of his life. That was one of the most wonderful times I had with my father. He wasn't in pain. He knew he was dying. He wasn't afraid. And Dad had always been terrible with his money. He just had, if he had it, he spent it. And it was Mom who managed the money, and Tara and I had supported them for years. And yet, as I cared for him, he kept saying, "David, I die a rich man." We talked, we laughed, we cried. But he never once said, "You remember that wonderful house we had in London, Ontario?" He never said, "I had a fine closet full of clothes," or "Remember that car in 1986 that I bought?" All we talked about were family, friends, and neighbors, and things that we did together. That's what my dad wanted to remember at the end of his life. And to him, that was his wealth. And in those, he was truly a rich man. As I watch you grow older, Tomo, as the eldest of my grandchildren, your incredible athleticism in hockey, football, and snowboarding seem to be leading you to some kind of career in sports. I was so surprised and so proud when you morphed into a snowboard activist, trying to entice young boarders to notice the world around them and how they were affected by it and how they could make it better. Because of your Chilean roots, you could snowboard in Canada during the winter and then continue snowboarding in Chile during the summer. As a result, you were exposed to issues of poverty in South America and to environmental concerns like the plight of sea turtles. And you have since gone on to become an environmental activist. I wonder where that will lead you in the coming years, but go for it. I'm with you. Young people often ask me, "How can I save the world?" And I tell them, don't worry about the world. The planet will do fine with or without us. But I tell them, follow your heart. Do what you love, whether it's art, music, writing, fixing cars, or carpentry. Environmentalism, you see, is not a specialty or a discipline like medicine or teaching or law. It's a way of seeing the world and recognizing that we are a part of the biosphere, dependent on nature, air, water, soil, photosynthesis, biodiversity, for our health and well-being. And we need everyone to see the world through that lens. In a chapter called My Life in Media, I write about some of the experiences and observations, and I've been urging for years young people to get outside and experience nature. So it's really disturbed me that people are really intrigued with all of this electronic stuff that's going on and the cyber world. You know, you can get glasses now and have whole scenes going on in a helmet. You don't have to go out in the real world. And the problem for me is that the cyber world in many ways can be better than the real world. I mean, you can actually have a gunfight in a cyber world, die and live to fight again. You can go in a race car and drive with all of the adrenaline, heart-thumping excitement of the experience, crash and walk away. You can have the kinkiest sex and not have to worry about STDs or getting caught. The cyber world can be better than the real world. But I think we've got to remember that there is another world that keeps us alive. And I had always thought that the nature of things was different. You know, we present pictures of nature and get people to see how nature is and fall in love with it. And now that I've thought about it, I think, oh, really? And the reason for that is, I had always thought that our programs on the nature of things, on the program, we were offering a picture of nature that would seduce people into loving the real world that we share with other species. But on reflection, I realized we were creating images of nature that were better than the real world. We send wildlife filmmakers to remote places like the Arctic or the Amazon, where they spend weeks and months trying to get the best shots. Polar bears emerging from a den, capturing seals or swimming from one ice floe to the next, or flocks of parrots, capybaras, snakes, and jaguars in the Amazon. Then one breathtaking shot after another is edited together so that months of effort are boiled down to a few minutes of action. Technology also provides images of nature not possible to see in real time with the naked eye. Microscopy, time-lapse, high-definition drones, submarines, endoscopes. The list of technological innovations for filming is incredible. But anyone is expecting to visit the Arctic or the Amazon to witness the hyperactivity seen on the nature of things is going to be disappointed. In the Amazon rainforest, much of the activity takes place at night or in the canopy high above the forest floor. Nature needs time to reveal her secrets, but we have become an impatient animal. In a world where satellite dishes and cable deliver dozens of channels from which to choose, my shows have to compete for the attention of remote control clutching viewers who have the attention span of a hummingbird. We don't have the luxury of time to relish the gradual revelations in nature. And the impression we get from films and TV is of nature hopped up on steroids. Still, as long as we realize that the vital ingredient of time is left out, I believe that natural history films convey a sense of wonder, amazement, and love that we desperately need if we are to appreciate the role that nature plays in our lives. And I started as the host of the Science magazine in 1974. And this was a big deal for me. It was my first big budget film that was going national, and it was coming out of Toronto. But I was at that time, I was a full professor with a big research lab in genetics. And quite frankly, the genetics was much more interesting to me than the television. I had to take a leave of absence from the University of British Columbia to do the series. But I found that the process was very, very tedious. And in my very first season, I gained one of the most important lessons from my television experience. One of the earliest shoots for Science magazine was a trip to New Orleans to film in a lab. I was seated on a stool as the camera assistant brought in the camera and tripod and set it up. The cameraman then set about making the lab look like a lab, which always makes me chuckle. Apparently, an actual working lab that doesn't have test tubes bubbling with colored water doesn't really look like a real lab, at least for a television audience. So as the lab was being rearranged, the sound man put a wire down my shirt, arranged the microphone, then asked me to say a few words so he could adjust his recorder. A lighting man came in and began to set up lights that didn't show in the shot, and then adjusted the filters and the focus of the light as the cameraman directed. Finally, when all seemed right, the cameraman came up and put a light meter beside my nose to take a reading, and then went back to the camera and adjusted the focus. Then he came back, took another reading on his light meter, went back and adjusted the focus. Nothing had changed. He did it for a third time, and then a fourth and a fifth time. So finally I said, "For Christ's sakes, Rudy, shoot the damn thing." Jim Murray, who was my boss at the time, grabbed me by the shoulder, pulled me into a side room, slammed the door, and said, "Listen, Suzuki, everyone in that room is busting their ass to make you look good, and that's not easy." And I slunk back into the room feeling very ashamed and never, ever got up on my high horse like that again. You see, he was absolutely right. When a program is broadcast, viewers like you don't say, "Wow, every shot was in focus." You don't say, "Wasn't the lighting great?" or "The sound was so crisp." What you say is, "Wasn't Suzuki's show great?" I get all the credit for what is the work of literally dozens of people, from researchers, writers, and secretaries, to editors, publicists, and a host of others working to make programs and get them to air. And I feel that way about everything I've done, from research, in which students, postdocs, and colleagues all contribute, to the work that comes out in books that I've written and co-written, and my work at the David Suzuki Foundation, with its dozens of staff, hundreds of volunteers, and thousands of donors. I get an inordinate amount of credit for what is the result of the passion, commitment, and hard work of so many others. I feel an enormous responsibility to them, which is to do the very best I can in whatever I'm involved in, and to be as credible and true to what I say as I can. I have another segment here from a chapter I call Fame and Heroes. Some of you may remember that back in the 1900s, doesn't that sound like an ancient time now? I think it was 1968, actually, that an artist named Andy Warhol predicted that there will come a time when everyone on earth will be famous for 15 minutes. And I think we're almost there. Of course, this is a time when you have YouTube and blogs and Facebook and viral videos. But it makes you ask, what the hell does it mean to be famous? I thought about this when one of my grandsons said, "Bampa, are you famous?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" And he said, "Because the kids tell me you're on television." So what I tried to explain was how superficial fame is. That a Paris Hilton or a Kim Kardashian will soon disappear because they're insignificant. I was asked by a reporter, well, they may have significant parts somewhere, but I was once asked by a reporter, "What do you hope people will say about you after you're gone?" And I was shocked. I said, "I don't give a shit what they say. I'll be dead. You think I'm doing this so people will say nice things about me after I couldn't care less." That kind of fame is not something of much interest. And I hope perhaps a few of the ideas that I've had will be carried on by others. But who cares who gets credit? And when I hear of famous people in history, from Churchill and Stalin to Genghis Khan and Julius Caesar, what I think about are the hundreds of thousands of people who contributed their lives to making it possible for these people to do what they did, and then disappeared from memory forever. And that's what led to this essay. The kindest, most considerate, most self-sacrificing person I have ever known was my mother, your great-grandmother. My father was the one everyone loved because he was so gregarious. Mom just worked away, keeping the family together, doing all the things like shopping, cooking, sewing, washing, cleaning, as well as managing the family's money and accounts and working full-time. She was usually the first up and the last to go to bed. She was the foundation of the family, and to me, the real hero. Like many Japanese women, she shied away from the spotlight. When people visited, she would rush around, making them comfortable, offering tea and cookies, and letting Dad be the center of attention. She was also a wonderful, protective, loving parent, but never asked for anything back. No recognition, reward, or even acknowledgement. I don't know if I can read the next section without crying. I think I'll leave that out. The memory of my mother will disappear when my sisters and I and our children pass on. The wonderful human being who was my mother will be remembered for only 2 generations and then will vanish forever. Why would I, who must constantly struggle to try to be like my mother, aspire for any more than my mother's fate? And I think of the millions of people who have lived, loved, worked, suffered, celebrated, and like my mother, vanished from our consciousness in a mere 2 generations. They were heroic in their humanity, and I can ask for nothing more. One of the most moving and profound statements about fame and power is from a poem by Shelley called Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on those lifeless things. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So much for fame. I first learned about climate change in the late 1970s. And certainly by the 1980s, we knew that climate change was going, we called it global warming back then, was going to be a serious issue. But I kept calling it a slow motion catastrophe. I really thought it was going to take decades before it would really kick in and we'd have to do something about it. So I was much more focused on issues of forestry, ocean depletion, and toxic pollution. But in 1988, I was invited for the first time to Australia by a newly formed group called the Commission for the Future, a non-governmental, government-established organization that was to advise government about science. And I went, and that's the first time I really looked at the data that climatologists were getting and realized, holy cow, we can't delay, this is really important. That was 1988. That fall of 88, Ken Hare at the University of Toronto called a meeting of 300 climatologists at the University of Toronto. Stephen Lewis told me he chaired some of the sessions. And the scientists were so concerned about climate change. At the end of the meetings, they issued a press release that said, global warming represents a threat to human survival, second only to all-out nuclear war. And they recommended that we reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 20% in 15 years. Think if we had done it. The reality is we would have saved over $100 million if we had done it. Over $100 billion if we had done it, and we would be way past the Kyoto target. That was 1988. Instead, we continued to ignore it. Emissions continued to rise, and despite experiment after experiment that said that climate change is real and approaching catastrophic levels, we have done almost nothing. And I have to say that the Harper government has denied the reality of climate change, has undone every little thing that the Liberal government before it had done to try to reduce emissions, and has simply not dealt with the issue. And yet Canada, more than any other industrialized nation, is threatened by the effects of climate change. We're a northern country. We already know from what the Inuit tell us that the warming is going on much faster in the Arctic. We have the longest marine coastline in the world. Water, when it warms, expands. Sea level rise from just warming the water will affect Canada more than any other country. And then you think about the impact on various aspects of the economy that are climate affected. Agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, winter sports. Canada has enormous risks that come with climate change. I believe what the Harper government has done is willful blindness, deliberately ignoring the science in order to carry out a different kind of agenda. Canadians ought to think about that. But in the discussions I've had over the years about the threat of climate change, I'm told over and over again by politicians and business people, well, you have to be realistic. These targets you're asking for are simply too deep, they're too difficult. Or they say it can't be done, or it'll cost too much. And so my next passage was written to discuss that. I was beginning my last year in college. I spent 8 years in the United States getting my education that I couldn't get in Canada at that time. I was beginning my last year in college in 1957 when an epidemic of Asian flu hit campus. Some of you may be old enough to remember. Tens of thousands of people died. That was a real killer, Asian flu. I lay there in bed so sick that all I could do was listen to the radio. Suddenly, on October 4th, I was electrified to hear that the Soviet Union had launched a satellite into space. It was sensational. I hadn't even known there was a space program. This was during the Cold War, and the Soviets were frightening as they were taking over governments in South America and Africa. For the Americans, every hour and a half, the beep beep of Sputnik was a reminder of Soviet technological might. As the United States ramped up its space program, and its first rockets, every one of them blew up on the launch pad, recruiting 7 astronauts with great fanfare, the Soviets piled up one space first after another. The first animal, a dog, Laika. The first man, Yuri Gagarin. The first team of cosmonauts. The first woman, Valentina Tereshkova. It was clear that the USSR was very advanced in science, engineering, and medicine. Americans didn't shrink from the challenge. They didn't moan about the Soviets' great lead or object to the cost of catching up. Instead, they threw themselves into the challenge, forming NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Association, in 1958, pouring money into science departments in universities, supporting students in science. It was a glorious time, even for a foreign student like me. All you had to do was say, I like science, and they threw money at you. On May 25th, 1961, President John F. Kennedy announced a plan to get an American astronaut safely to the moon and back before the end of the decade. thus beating the USSR in what was now called a space race. It was an audacious goal, since it was far from clear how or whether the United States could do it. But they made the commitment to try. And on July 20th, 1969, American astronaut Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon, the first human landing there. It was an astounding achievement because it was accomplished in less than a decade, and because the United States was the first and so far only country to land people on the moon. But even more impressive are all of the unexpected benefits of the space race. Since 1976, NASA has published a magazine called Spin-Off, listing hundreds of technologies that have resulted from the space efforts, ranging from laptop computers and GPS to 24-hour news networks to freeze-dried food, space blankets, cordless vacuums, cochlear implants, and ear thermometers. And Americans still feature prominently every year when Nobel Prize winners are announced, all because in 1957, the United States made the commitment to catch up and pass the Soviet Union in space. So I tell my American friends, it's un-American to say meeting the challenge of climate change is too great or will cost too much. That's not the American way. The America I knew and admire would seize on this opportunity and commit to solving it in the full knowledge that enormous unpredictable benefits will fall out along the way. The most important thing in meeting any challenge is to make the commitment. Now, I end the book with a separate letter to each of my grandchildren. Dear Tomo, my first grandchild, I'm so proud that you recently participated in the protest against the Kinder Morgan pipeline in British Columbia. You did what I would have done myself were it not a risk to my position as host of The Nature of Things. After you were arrested and later cleared of all charges for civil disobedience, your mom asked me to write a letter of support to a judge. It was never used, but here's the gist of what I wrote. The world is on a collision course with the things that keep us alive and healthy: the air, water, soil, and variety of life. Corporations, especially those with head offices in other parts of the country or the world, care little for the interests of local ecosystems or local communities, except insofar as they interfere with the drive to maximize profit for shareholders. They have no obligation to protect local ecosystems or communities. Their sole goal is to make as much money as they can get away with. Tomo is fighting for the world that will be left to him and his generation in the future. I believe that what Kinder Morgan and companies like it are doing is what his aunt Severn calls an intergenerational crime. But there are no legal precedents to pursue criminal charges on that basis. Before corporations had become so powerful, every generation aspired to leave a better future for their children. This is not on the corporate agenda. There are few legal avenues to protest what I believe is the criminal activity of corporations like Kinder Morgan. So citizens like Tomo are being forced to participate in civil disobedience. He is taking an active role in the struggle for human rights, social justice, and environmental protection. And he has done this without attempting to ride on or hide under my coattails. He is a role model for young people today. I only have one granddaughter. How I miss, girls always love their dads, and I wanted lots of granddaughters. Midori is my only granddaughter. When I was in high school in the 1950s, women were expected to raise the family and care for the household. while men worked and brought in the family income. A working mother was a sign of poverty. As the women's rights movement began to grow, demanding equal opportunity and equal pay for equal work, enormous opportunities opened up for women. It was a struggle, but now girls can aspire and dream beyond the roles of wife and mother. Once math and physics were considered men's areas, but women are making a huge mark in these fields. More than half of all students in undergraduate and graduate schools, medicine and law in Canada are now women. And in traditionally male fields like engineering, agriculture, and forestry, enrollment of women is rising rapidly. This is a seismic shift. And although there remain barriers to many top positions in business and professions, they are bound to be broken by the sheer numbers and talents of women working in these areas. You may find it hard to believe, but Nana, my current wife, Tara, was once rejected for citizenship because she wanted to keep her last name when we married. Nana was born in England and immigrated with her parents to Canada when she was 5. But she didn't bother to take out Canadian citizenship until we were married 43 years ago and were planning a 4-month trip around the world. She needed a passport and realized she had to take out citizenship in order to get one. This should have been a simple step, but when she applied, she was rejected, though her brother, Uncle Peter, was with her and got his citizenship right away. Nana and I were shocked and outraged. She appealed for reconsideration and was called to Ottawa to make her case. She was finally granted citizenship and a Canadian passport, and today a woman's keeping her last name after marriage is no big deal. Today, my darling, I don't sense that you feel any limits imposed by gender on what you choose to do in your life. Your mother and grandmothers were feminists who demanded an end to the sexism that restricted their futures. Jonathan is a teenager, and he, as I said, has cerebral palsy. And wow, that is challenging. Jonathan, you won't remember, but during your early years, your parents read everything they could about the human brain and body and used every means possible to stimulate your muscles and your mind. I was amazed at the way your dad would flip you around, lifting you and stimulating the muscles you needed to balance yourself. Your parents knew that even though you are legally blind, your brain could receive signals from other parts of the visual system, and as a result, you can read. And I don't understand how it works, but I know you look at things not directly, but at an angle that lets you see from a different part of your retina. The computer and television have been a godsend to you, and you have done so well in school and at home. I am so proud of you. Do you remember that summer when you came to stay at our cabin on Quadra Island and you caught your first shiner on the dock? How you loved the feeling of speed in our boat as the wind blew through your hair and sea spray hit your face. And you loved the seafood, the fish and prawns and clams and oysters. As your parents have had to adjust their lives to the reality of your special needs and limitations, I've been inspired and filled with admiration. They are ordinary people who have acted with extraordinary strength and love, which to me is truly heroic. I believe we define ourselves as a species in the way we treat those who are disabled, handicapped, or in need of special care, and our response affirms that we are an amazing species. Soon you will be finished with school, and as a man, you will meet new challenges when you consider finding a house that you can share with others. All your life, each challenge for you has brought great joy as you've met and overcome them. You are my hero, Jonathan, and Nana and I are so proud of you. Gantlands is now going on 7. The word Gantlans is a Haida word meaning people who stand together. In 1981, we did a film for The Nature of Things about the battle over logging on Haida Gwaii, and it garnered a huge audience, and letters and phone calls supporting the Haida poured in. The way the Haida stood up to the forest company and the government to fight for the protection of their land inspired people all across Canada. At the time, I didn't think the Haida had a chance against all the forces aligned against them. But Gujau, Miles Richardson, and all the elders who are now gone stood together and put their bodies on the line on Lyle Island. They were arrested by the dozens, but their act prevented logging and eventually resulted in the creation of Gwaii Hanas, a national park reserve. It was a huge achievement that inspired a nation. Ever since, Nana and I have loved to visit, and when we meet friends there, they tell us, welcome home. We feel Haida Gwaii is our second home. And now that you and Tisan live there, we have all the more incentive to visit often. The Haida connection to the land has inspired me and also taught me about our relationship with Mother Earth. It was Gujau who explained that without that connection, we are rootless and we become like everyone else. Your Nanai, his Haida grandmother, recognized something in your mother when she was just a child. And she said she wanted Severn to come to Haida Gwaii for the summer to learn how to live on the land. When she was young, Sev was too shy to go, but as a teenager she went and learned so much from your Nanai about the traditional ways of food gathering and preparation. I remember when Nana and I were going out fishing with Miles, and we met your mother and your Nanai and Chinai and Chief Watson Price in their boat. Your mother was so happy as she showed us all the salmon she had helped to catch and the sea urchins and scallops she harvested. What a fantastic summer she had. Back then, your father was a full-grown man who was chasing women already. I am sure your Nanai never thought your mom and dad would get together and marry one day, but she sure was happy when they did. And Gantlans has a younger brother named Tisan, who's 3. You and your brother are so loved by your parents, your grandparents, and your Haida community, and you are fortunate to be growing up in the confidence of that love and support. There will be times when you are sad, lonely, or upset, when you will be able to draw on that love. My dear, sweet Tisan, how Nana and I wish we could shield you and your brother Gantlans from hurt that will come during your lives. I've emphasized the love that you are enveloped in from family because that is your shield, your armor against ignorance and bigotry. It pains me to tell you that despite the enormous increase in appreciation and respect for First Nations in Canada, there is still a great deal of prejudice that will be directed at you. Some people resent what they feel is undeserved support from their tax dollars on reserves, that you can pay less in taxation, or you have unwarranted claims to the land, and so on. Others point to alcoholism, disproportionate numbers in prison, or welfare costs, without regard to the historical and social causes of many of these problems, and as if the accusations apply to all First Nations people. Your family will buffer you against the pain of any encounters you will have with people who are ignorant and don't know what they're talking about. Know that you are a fine human being who has the love and support of the people who matter. And my latest grandchild is a boy named Rio. As a professional rafting and kayaking guide, your father is acutely aware of how lucky we are to live in British Columbia. He will regale you with wonderful stories of his encounters with grizzly bears, wolves, moose, and so many other animals in the wild. I know he will take you on trips as soon as you are old enough, But Chris also knows that these wilderness areas are threatened by climate change, which is melting the glaciers at an alarming rate, as well as by clear-cut logging, roads, and mining. Your mother has always loved the ocean. As a child, she would be the first to discover or observe things. She loved to find the smallest creatures, crabs, sculpins, starfish. And like your cousin Guntland, she has had incredible persistence, wading into pools or wandering beaches and forest trails for hours, just looking and collecting. She was the first in the family to find porcelain crabs, flat animals under tidal rocks that had long antennae and one bigger claw. She knew where to find salamanders and had the patience to find and catch beautiful nudibranchs. And she is the most patient and successful fisher of all of us. So your parents are great role models. You will grow up loving the outdoors as you learn to kayak and canoe with your dad, and as you accompany your mom on field trips for her work in marine biology. You will learn to love the ocean and rivers and lakes, and to care about their perilous state. And because you and your cousins love nature, I know you will become warriors fighting to protect the things you love. But, you know, as an old man, I couldn't resist having a final word. So the last chapter is called Final Words. My most important piece of advice to all of you is to be thoughtful about the way you live. At a time when the global economy dominates our lives, it's easy to buy something without even thinking about the global repercussions of that purchase. The ramifications of purchasing even simple goods like clothing, food, and drinks are immense. And when it comes to big ticket items like a car, computer, or television set, or even a house, the ecological, social, and economic effects become enormous. You see, this global system is simply too destructive to be truly sustainable. Think about the way we live at home. Where does the electricity that powers our house, the water that flows through our taps, or even the air that we breathe come from? When we flush the toilet, what happens to the poo, paper, pee, plastic tampon inserts, tampons and condoms that are routinely flushed down the toilet? What happens to the contents of our blue boxes or garbage cans when they are picked up and put in dump trucks? Canada is a northern country with a limited growing season, yet we can buy fresh fruit and vegetables year-round, even in the far north. How is that possible? Canada has more fresh water per capita than any other nation on earth, yet we seem to accept that there are more than 1,000 boil water alerts in communities in Canada every day. We don't object to paying more for water in plastic bottles than we pay for gasoline. In 1989, economist E.F. Schumacher wrote an influential book called Small is Beautiful, a study of economics as if people mattered. The notion that small is beautiful goes against our belief today that more and bigger are better. But why would they be better? Other than flaunting our economic status to others, why do we need more and bigger when we should be thinking about the quality of our lives? In the small, economically poor kingdom of Bhutan, hidden in the Himalayas between India and China, the new king's father declared that the goal of his society was not economic growth, but happiness. The Bhutanese are Buddhists, and happiness is seen there as coming from a sense of belonging, of having a place in society, of living where nature flourishes, and where there is adequate medical care, low infant mortality, and universal education. This is quite a departure from Western societies in which economic growth and consumption are seen as the measures of success, rather than a means to some higher goal. Being thoughtful about how you live also means being kind and generous to others. I find I derive far more pleasure and satisfaction when I share with others than when I hoard something for myself, because the act of sharing affirms that we are members of a community, and that community matters to us. Please spend as much time as possible outside, unplugged, so that you can hear, see, and smell the world around you. Why do you need to go outside? For one thing, to appreciate what it is that keeps you alive. And the more time you spend outside, the more you are able to sense change in that world. But even more profound, we have to get outside and seek nature because we need that connection for our physical and mental health. I hope you can find ways to acknowledge, be grateful for, and celebrate the things that matter most to us. By these things, I mean our ultimate mother, Earth, for her generosity in providing all that we need to survive and enjoy health and well-being. We have to develop little ways to remind ourselves how important air, water, photosynthesis, soil, food, and other species are. Just get outside and revel in the sun's warmth on our skin, or the snowflakes that tickle our faces. Take swims in freshwater rivers or lakes, and watch the rain create puddles for children to play in. These are joyous acknowledgments we can make right through the year, not just the orgy of consumption that overtakes us in December. You are my legacy, for which I am most proud and happy. I can't take much credit for who you are and what values you hold, but I do take pride and joy in your mothers and the partners they chose in whose lives I had a much bigger hand. I hope my love will remain with you throughout your long and happy lives. With all my love, your Bampa. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great. Thank you. I don't know if there are questions you might have after that. It's kind of a personal statement, but they have allotted some time, is that right, for questions? I'm happy to field any if you have any.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you something that you put out in the media a while ago. I'm a fish lover, and you mentioned the water pollution. And to quote you, you were saying that whether you eat freshwater fish or farmed fish, the level of PCBs and mercury is so bad that a person should only eat, like salmon, 3 times a year. Has this situation got even worse?
Well, I don't think it was me that actually wrote that. I personally never eat farmed salmon because we know that when you feed the salmon pellets in cages, that it concentrates whatever is in those pellets. Most of the pellets are made from fish that come from South America, anchovies, herring, sardines. And what you do is you biomagnify, you concentrate the chemicals that are in the feed in the fish. So this farmed salmon are loaded with fire retardant, PCBs, dioxin, all of that stuff is in there. Of course, we know that wild tuna, shouldn't be eating wild tuna anyway because they're endangered, but they do have high concentrations of mercury. I think fish, I'm not a vegetarian because I can't bring myself to give up fish. But we should probably all be vegetarians. In terms of fish, there are very few truly sustainable fisheries that are possible, and quite frankly, I think the state of the oceans mean that within a few years, we're going to be eating jellyfish.
Oh my goodness. But would you say today, eating smaller fish like sardines and smelts are cleaner fish than the big fish?
Yes, of course, because they live shorter period of time. They don't concentrate. So it's better to eat the sardines, anchovies, and herring. Than, like in Lake Ontario, better to eat the smelt than to eat the salmon that feed on the smelt in the lake.
Thank you, thank you.
Hi, David.
Hi.
First and foremost, I wanted to thank you for hosting this free lecture. It's almost galvanizing to hear you speak rather than just hear your voice on the nature of things. I'm a member of a small community group in Toronto that advocates against the flow of diluted bitumen through Line 9 because of the possibility of an oil spill. And we always encounter people who choose to remain stagnant and refuse to believe that this possibility is very real. And I'm sure you've encountered many of these people. And my question to you is, how do you mobilize these people who choose to remain stagnant? And obviously these people are also in positions of power, such as politicians or even ordinary citizens. So how do you mobilize them?
Well, I think
to
there are two challenges
understand?
you're talking about. One is to mobilize just civil society, the general public. And I have an answer for that. The other, of course, is how we get politicians to do what we want. Right now, we have governments that run on what is basically a corporate agenda. Corporations are the ones that are able to give money to candidates for public office when they're elected. Guess who's first in line to get and see the politician? It's corporations. And I believe that people that we elect are not stupid. They really believe that what's good for General Motors is good for the public. That is the corporate agenda they support because they think that it's good for Canadians. Well, it's not. The corporate agenda is driven by one reason and one reason only. That's to maximize profit. And they, you know, this is a bit of a side effect. I'm tired of fighting. I think that we have to come together and talk together. So a couple of years ago, I got a call from Fort McMurray, who was the CEO of a very large oil company in the tar sands. And he said, is it possible for me to come and talk to you? I said, great, thank you for calling. Come on down, happy to see you. The next day, he was at my office, and I said, I'm so glad to meet you and honored that you came. Now, just do me one favor. I want you to leave your ID as the CEO of an oil company outside the door. I want to meet you as a human being and talk about what do we agree on. I mean, what's the point? If we don't agree, then we're fighting for what? Different things. Can we start with the basis of agreement? What is the most important thing every human being on the planet needs? Well, I could see right away he was very, very uncomfortable. So I said, look, let me try this out on you. If you don't have air for 3 minutes, you're dead. If you have to breathe contaminated air, you're sick. So can you not agree with me as a human being? Clean air has got to be the highest priority of any society. And then I said, if you don't have water for 4 or 5 days, you're dead. If you have to drink polluted water, you're sick. We're made up basically over 60% of our bodies is water. Can we not put clean water up with air? And then I said, you know, without food, some of us can live longer than others, but 3 to 6 weeks without food and you're dead. If you have to eat food that's polluted, you're sick. Can we put food and soil up there? And so I said, look, can we not agree these are the highest priorities? Then we can ask the question, how do we make a living? Well, I realize now it was stupid of me to even try this with him because he had come to see me as the CEO of an oil company. And he had come to negotiate. And I think this is the challenge. If we can't all agree what the important things are that keep us alive, and we're just going to fight, we're going to lose every time. And right now, we're losing big time. So I believe that in a democracy, we call ourselves a democracy, we have to mobilize people. If you really believe there are threats and we need change, then damn it, get off our asses and let's get out there and reclaim this country. And that's from involvement in the political process. Children don't vote. We've got to be out there being eco-warriors on behalf of our children. We've got to demand that politicians do more than just look to the next election. What are they doing to the air? What are they doing to the water, to the soil, the other species that keep us alive and healthy? We've got to make those issues that politicians are going to deal with. That means mobilization. I think the exciting thing now is getting young people. I found that adults, once they've gone through university, they get a job and buy a house and get married, have kids, then when environmentalists come along and say, you're going to have to change your way, they get mad. And I understand that. They've invested a lot of time to get where they are, and now those damned enviros are telling me I can't have this. So I say that young people who have everything at stake in what's going on today, they've got to mobilize the two most important people on the planet. If their mom and dad aren't going to fight for their future, then what the hell? We don't deserve a better fate. So we've got to get young people talking to mom and dad and mobilizing them. You know, I have kids that say, you know, I'm so worried about the environment, but my dad just doesn't think any of this is important. You know, I have to, and I say, if you can't convince your dad, how the hell are we going to go out and convince the general public? So that's, I think we've got to mobilize young people, realize decisions that are made or not made today are going to influence them. Not old farts like me. I'm at the end of my life. It's their future that's at stake. And yet, the people that are making those decisions, they're not accountable for what they do or do not do. So I think we have to reclaim democracy, and that means galvanizing parents and grandparents.
Thank you.
Well, first, I can't say how thrilled I'm here to take part in this. Just out of curiosity, as a geneticist, are you happy with the way, or what's your opinion on the way things tend to be going with GMOs and Monsantos and the way the whole talk about artificial intelligence is starting to come
Well, I
about?
think these are all areas that they're going full blast. And what worries me, you know, I'm a geneticist. I'm blown away with what can be done in genetics. We're doing things, well, not we, but people that are still active are doing experiments that I never dreamed I would live to see done. I mean, it's staggering. The problem is that the agenda for applying those ideas and technologies is driven by companies like Monsanto. And when profit becomes the driving force, that scares the hell out of me. And I think Monsanto is an evil company. When Rachel Carson published Silent Spring, published Silent Spring about the effects of pesticides in 1962, when she went to Congress to testify, who led the charge against her? Monsanto. Monsanto is a company that has all kinds of rationalizations for why what they're doing is good. But the bottom line is they are ruthless, and profit is their drive, and I don't trust that. In terms of artificial intelligence, yeah, it's going on. There are people that say, oh, well, you know, it's inevitable. The human brain is just a computer made out of meat. And I happen to think that it's because our brain is made out of meat that it's a radically different basis than just the binary system in a silicon chip. So I think the idea that we'll simply get more and more information in that computer and will reproduce human intelligence, I think it'll be a very different kind of intelligence. But they're working on it very strongly.
I know they want to give it emotions and stuff. And it's,
Yep.
Thanks.
Last question?
Hi. First and foremost, I want to just thank you as a young person for being here and for all the things that you've done for us. I know you hear all the time, but you've inspired me and you've inspired a movement among us. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you. Secondly, I think that this book is sort of the sentimental epitome of your career, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I want to know what you're going to do next. If you're not in a derogatory way. If you're anything like me and like a lot of people, you think along the lines of bigger, stronger. I just want to know what you're going to do from here.
Well, I used to talk about retirement. And my wife finally kicked me in the head and said, listen, Suzuki, you're doing what you believe in, that you think is important, and you enjoy the process. Why would you want to stop? So stop using the word retirement. And the reality is that normally when I give a speech, I always give a speech and say, I'm speaking to you as an elder. And I believe that this state in my life is the most important time of my life. You see, elders are a group that are very unique in society. We don't give a shit about celebrity or money or power. We're past that. Now, I know there are some old people that still want money or power. They need help. We're past that. We're past that. And because we don't have to worry about not getting a raise or a promotion or getting fired, we can speak the truth from our hearts. And if someone is offended by that, that's their problem, not mine. And I think elderhood gives us a very important role then in being able to speak openly and freely. And we have something no other group in society has. We've lived an entire lifetime. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've suffered failures. I've had a few successes. I've learned a lot. And what I have learned through my life, I believe, is a priceless legacy to pass on to younger people. We don't want them to make the same bloody mistakes we made over and over again. So I keep telling elders, this is a time to get the hell off the golf course or off the couch. Get on with the most important part of your life. Sift through your life. What are the fundamental things that you've learned that we've got to pass on to young people? And then talk to your children and grandchildren about that. What am I going to do? I measure what my life is all about by the number of days I spend at home in bed with my wife. And I have to say, a lot of my life has been spent somewhere else. So I'd like to spend more time at home and with her, and but I will continue to be as vocal and active as my health will allow. And right now, knock on wood, my health is pretty good.